everyone to the ATAR Notes lecture. So just a little bit about ATAR Notes before we get into the lecture today. They create a bunch of free resources, and you might be familiar with some of the resources they create, but these are just some examples that you can see on the slide. But the resources range from the study notes, so you might be familiar with like the ATAR Notes study notes, as well as the lectures like these ones, and then discussion forums, but essentially just creating a bunch of resources to help VCE students like you to give you a bit of extra support in your studies. Amazing. All right, let's get into the lecture. So welcome everyone to the 3 and 4 Business Management lecture for today. My name is Anandi. A little bit about myself before we get into the content. So I hope everyone has been enjoying their school holidays and you've been able to, find some downtime and relax from the very hectic term that you've had, but also just, get a little bit of a head start of your exam revision, since exams are very much close impending on and are around the corner. But a little bit about me. So I graduated in 2021 and I got an ATAR of 96.25. For business management, I received a study score of 44 as well as above 40 study score for my other subjects like health and human development, further, and English. I'm currently in my second year of commerce at the University of Melbourne, which I'm loving very much, and I am majoring in finance and marketing. Aside from that, I'm also a very strong, avid animal lover, and that is my dog over there. His name is Prince, but very much love dogs. All right, amazing. So a little breakdown on our lecture today. So it's going to be divided onto 2 blocks, content blocks. In the first block, we'll be looking at Unit 3, so all of the 3 areas of studies that you studied under Unit 3. And then in Block 2, we'll be looking at Unit 4, as well as a little bit on exam preparation. How might you best prepare for your exams for business management? Also, just a note, the lecture slides are available, and also this is a recording that you're watching, so don't feel like you need to get everything down as I go through it. You can always, rewatch the lecture or pause it, depending on, the pace that you feel comfortable with. But I will be moving relatively fast through the content just because, in the 2 hours that we have a lot to get through. Essentially, what you've covered in a whole year, we have to get through in 2 hours. So don't stress too much, since all the resources are available to you as well. On top of that, ask any questions that you have in the poll section, and I'll be there and I'll be answering them in the live chat. So if there's something that you don't understand or you feel like you want more clarification on, just feel free to ask it in the live chat. Okay, and then this is just a bit of a visual on the course for Unit 3 and 4. So under Unit 3, we had 3 areas of studies. So the first one you looked at was business foundations, then the second one was managing employees, and then operations management, and then under Unit 4, that was all looking at change. So the first thing we looked at in Area Study 1 was reviewing performance and understanding the need for change. And then the second area of study was then considering how a business might go about actually implementing change. So Block 1 is focusing on Unit 3. So this is a breakdown on Unit 3. I'm not going to go through all of the key knowledge points, but you have it there just to have a quick squiz through. Just remind yourself what you covered in Area Study 1. Okay, amazing. So the first thing we looked at was the types of businesses. So if you can remember, we had 6 types of businesses. The first one we learnt was sole trader. So a sole trader is owned by a single individual, and so they are subjected to unlimited liability. Unlimited liability just means that in the case that the business falls into excessive debt, or is trying to be liquidated, the owners' personal assets can be seized because, the owner and the business are considered as like one entity. So it's an unincorporated business structure. Then with a partnership, very similar to a sole trader in the sense that it also has unlimited liability. So in the case of excessive debts, personal assets can be seized to compensate for those debts. But with a partnership, now we're looking at between 2 and 20 people who own the business. Then we have private limited companies. So now we are looking at shareholders. So it's between 1 to 50 shareholders. This is a business structure that is subject to limited liability, which just means that now the company and the owners are regarded as separate. So the owners are not held personally liable for any debts that the company incurs. So it's just that the shareholders would lose the percentage of shares that they own in that company. With private limited company, it also has perpetuity, which just means that if the original owners or if owners leave the business, or if the original owners pass away, the company can continue to exist regardless of the number of owners entering or leaving the business. And then lastly, it's not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So if you're a shareholder to a private limited company, you can only be a shareholder if you've been invited to be a shareholder. Otherwise, you're not. Otherwise, no one from the public can become a shareholder to the private limited company, and therefore it's not listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Public listed company. So now we're looking at a bigger company. Tends to be a lot bigger, just because now we have 50 plus shareholders. There's no cap on the number of shareholders you have as long as it's more than 50, and so therefore the company has access to a lot more capital. Also subjected to limited liability, has perpetuity, and now it's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So meaning that anyone from the public can become a shareholder to a public listed company. So if I wanted to, right now I could become a shareholder to Macca's or to Apple. So any big corporation that you can think of, you can, buy shares if you wanted to. All right, then we have social enterprises. So with this, essentially profits are distributed to a community cause. Remember, it's important to be careful with the wording here. It's not just to the community, but rather it's directed to a community cause. So social enterprises aren't just handing out free money to everyone in the community. It's more so directed towards an actual issue or problem that exists within the community. So it might be inequality, or it might be discrimination, whatever it is, it's more targeted towards the cause. Then government business enterprise. So with this, this is where the profits are returned to the owner, which is the government ultimately. And the main objective of a GBE is to provide an essential service. So any essential service that you can think of, most likely it's operated or owned by a GBE. So for example, Australia Post, so the delivering of mail, or Vicar Roads. Those are some pretty key good examples of government business enterprises. Okay, then we have management styles. So you would have remembered that we learnt about different management styles. So the first one we had was an autocratic management style. So with an autocratic management style, this is where the communication is exclusively downwards and the manager makes all the decisions with no feedback. And so when we're thinking about the direction of communication, it's one way and it's going downwards because you have the manager and they're essentially just communicating their decisions to their employees. Decision-making power. So this would be centralized because the manager is ultimately the one making the decision. Then our second management style is persuasive. Persuasive is when the management makes the decision, so it's still centralized, but then they're explaining or selling the decision to their employees. So in selling the decision, they're going to be explaining the reasons of making the decision or that decision to the employees. And so the direction of communication is still one way, and it's still downwards, because management is not only making the decision, but now they're just simply justifying the decision to employees. And it's still centralized because the manager is still the one who's making the decision at the end of the day. Then we have consultative. So consultative is where employees' ideas and opinions are considered before the decisions are made, but ultimately the manager will still be the one making the final decision. And so the direction of communication is now two ways. It's upwards and downwards, because now employees are also communicating to managers, and managers are also communicating to employees. So upwards would be employees to managers, and then downwards is the communication occurring from managers to employees. The decision-making power remains to be centralized just because the manager is still making the decision. The only difference is now that they're considering the ideas and the opinions of their employees. All right, then we have participative. This is where decision-making is shared between manager and employees, and both parties are now engaging in two-way communication. So now we have two-way communication because we have that dialogue and communication occurring from employees to managers, which is upwards, and managers to employees, which is downwards. And now the decision-making power is decentralized because now both management and employees have equal decision-making power. Then the last management style that we looked at was laissez-faire. This is where decisions are completely left to the group. So managers are giving up all decision-making responsibility, and so now communication is always, so it's between everyone. So it can be employees to employees, managers to managers, managers to employees, employees to managers. So it's just occurring, communication is just occurring to everyone. There's no formal direction of communication, and decision-making power is decentralized because now everyone has the ability to make decisions, and they're making decisions together. So to summarize, autocratic is the manager, so they're the one making the decision. Therefore, communication is one way, and decision-making power is centralized. Persuasive is when the manager is making the decision but is justifying their decision to employees. So it remains to be one-way communication and centralized decision-making. Then consultative is the manager now considering the ideas and opinions of employees but still making the final decision. So communication is two-way but centralized decision-making power. Participative is where decision-making power is shared between employees and managers. So two-way communication and decentralized decision-making power. And then laissez-faire is everyone has the ability to make decisions. So communication is always, and then decision-making power is decentralized. So remember, it's good to really to understand the management style, just so that you'll be more comfortable with the direction of communication and decision-making power, since you should be including that when you are answering questions on management style, so including that sort of terminology. And a lot of people do tend to confuse up the persuasive and participative management style, so do make sure you can make that distinction, because you don't want to be talking about the wrong one in the exam. So if an exam question asks you to talk about persuasive, you don't want to be spelling out the definition of participative management style, because that would not be good on the exam, because you will be losing marks. So do make sure that you are able to define all of them and are confident in understanding all of those management styles. Okay, so on top of that, we have all of our management styles, but it's also important to understand when different management styles would be appropriate. So when we're considering that, there's different things we need to make note of. So depending on the nature of task, that might potentially indicate a good management style that would be appropriate for that situation. So is the nature of the task classified or open? So can people know about it, or is it more, secretive, or, only a few couple people can know about it? Is it an unpopular or necessary decision? Then also important to consider the time that you have to make that decision. So is a quick decision required where you have to, make it within a day or a couple of hours? Or do you have a lot of available time? Do you have days? Do you have months? Do you have weeks to make that decision? And then also the experience of employees. So are employees experienced? Do they have qualifications? Or are they fairly new? And, maybe if they are new, would it be a smart thing to give them decision-making power when they're not familiar with, what they're doing, and they're still adjusting to the business? So that's really important. And then even manager preference. So are they a good decision maker, or are they a good leader? What skills do they have? Do they have good planning skills? So those are some things that you would need to think about. Okay, question. So you're a manager of a VCE tutoring center, and you've just hired 10 new managers who have no experience working at your center. Which management style should you implement for the first month that these tutors are working? So I've given you these 3, but have a bit of a think about what one would you implement. Give you guys a couple of minutes to have a think about that. Okay, let's have a think about this. So some things to note with this little scenario is that you have new tutors. So they don't have much experience. So participative management style would not be appropriate, just because you are then giving decision-making power to your tutors who are new and unexperienced. So not the best. So essentially what I've said. And then autocratic management, again, wouldn't go with autocratic, just because with autocratic is when the manager's making decisions, and so it can come across as a little bit bossy. I feel like persuasive management has the edge over autocratic, just because the manager is able to explain the reasons for the decisions, and then it also means that new employees can therefore learn how the business works. So through that justification, that can offer a lot of opportunity in terms of just understanding and learning, about the business. So that's sort of why persuasive would be the better one over autocratic, because not much learning is being gained through autocratic management. It's just sort of telling the tutors what to do. Okay, and then we had management skills, so communication. That's just looking at the transfer of information between one person to another person. Delegation is looking at the process of handing down tasks and responsibility to subordinates. So, sort of just key thing, handing down responsibility to people below you. Decision making is the ability to see alternative solutions, so all the possibilities, and then seeing which possibility and solution would be the most appropriate in a given situation. Planning is involving, deciding in advance the steps that an organization should take to reach an objective, so that they're well equipped to achieve and achieve and reach those objectives. Leading is influencing and motivating staff to achieve organizational objectives. So being a good figure of support, but also just inspiring others to be their best and achieving amazing organizational outcomes. Interpersonal. So this is the ability to relate and empathize with others and build effective relationships. So this one's looking more so around the building of relationships between people within the business. So interpersonal skills are very important in creating positive relationships with the manager and employees, so that employees feel comfortable and they feel supported. So why is communication important for a business? Communication is important because employees need clear information about what is expected of them to perform their jobs correctly. So it's just important in sort of employees understanding expectations and, therefore understanding those expectations and working to meet those expectations when, doing their job. Good communication also really helps in building strong relationships with employees and, improving corporate culture as well. So communicating could even just be, a praise or recognizing hard work or even just giving feedback. So communication is so applicable in different ways, and therefore it's so important to have effective communication that is, clear, concise, and articulate, so that information is being received most effectively. And that can have, effects like this, where it can build strong relationships and also just impact corporate culture. Two-way communication allows for both managers and employees to receive feedback on their ideas and performance. So again, just understanding what needs to be improved upon, so that managers are supporting employees in achieving their best and improvement and exceeding. So that then leads us to corporate culture. So what is corporate culture? Corporate culture is the shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes held by those within the business. The key word here is shared. So it's really what everyone is, that common belief, that values and attitudes held by everyone in the business. So when we're looking at corporate culture, we need to know the two types of corporate culture. So you have real or official. Real corporate culture is the actual and established shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization. And some indications of real corporate culture could be workplace behaviors, such as the celebration of rituals and events. But the key thing to note is that you don't know real corporate culture unless you have a direct link to the business. So really only employees or people within the business can actually understand real corporate culture. No one from the public can, fully understand real corporate culture, just because that is the actual and established shared set of beliefs, values, and attitudes. And that's only reflected through, workplace behaviors and whatever you see in the business. The official corporate culture is more so what's presented to the public. So it's the stated and documented outline of the beliefs, values, and attitudes within an organization, as reflected by documentation such as, mission and vision statements. So anything that's presented to the public, anything that's available for the public to see. So the examples given there were mission and vision statements, but even like slogans, that is indicative of what the business's values and beliefs and attitudes might be. So what are some ways management could influence and develop a desired culture at an organization? So thinking about, the management style that they used, dress code, rituals. So if they want employees to feel included, if they want, them to feel a sense of belonging and purpose, they might use a consultative management style where, they are still making decisions, but employees might feel more included because they have their ideas and opinions considered. And then even just thinking about providing training, reinforcing desired culture through meetings. So there's so many different strategies that businesses can use. Okay, so that is area study 1. So some key things to remember with this area of study. With sole trader, important that in your definition you include the word owned, because sole trader and partnership have owners. So because they aren't incorporated businesses, the owners and the business are regarded as one. That means you have to make sure that you include owned. Partnership as well, you need to specifically say it's between 2 to 20 people and also include the word owned. Social enterprise, I mentioned this before, but it's important that you say that profits are going towards a community cause, not just distributed towards the community, because it's not just free money for everyone and anyone. Corporate culture, again, make sure you include the word shared, because it's all about the shared set of values, beliefs, and attitudes. Stakeholder, that's someone with a vested interest into the business. And then shareholders, define in detail, not just someone who owns a share of the business. So yeah, important to make that distinction between stakeholders and shareholders, because a lot of people get confused and they mix up, shareholders and stakeholders. If an exam question asks you to talk about or to define a stakeholder, don't give the definition of a shareholder, because you will lose marks for it. A shareholder is an example of a stakeholder, but don't mix up the terms. Okay, and now, area of study 2, managing employees. So let us have a look at that. This is the key knowledge points that we need to be aware of. So you can have a bit of a squiz. I'll give you a minute just to have a read through all of that. Okay, let us continue. So, key skills. We need to be aware of our task words. So anything in the area study could theoretically be discussed or evaluated. So important that you are prepared to do so. So it could refer to motivation strategies and training options. Important that you bring a contemporary case example with you in the exam. I think that's just applicable for all of the area studies. So just make sure with contemporary examples that's it's from the last 4 years, and it's an Australian business. And then, awards and agreements, just the normal task words. Yeah. So with your task words, what the different ones require you to do. So with discuss, compare, evaluate. Discuss is talking about advantages and disadvantages. Evaluate is the same thing, advantages and disadvantages. However, you need to include your opinion at the end. Compare is similarities and differences. And then, distinguish, which I don't believe is in this area study, is just the differences. Okay, let's continue. So this area of study is looking at managing employees, and the first dot point is what is the link between managing employees or, human resource management and objectives. So when you have the effective management of employees, we will firstly have motivated employees and also well-trained employees. We'll look at motivated employees first. So where we have motivated employees, that means that employees are going to be a lot more productive and they're going to be a lot more efficient because potentially they'll, with less input, with less time, they're doing things a lot more quicker. Um, yeah, they're creating more output more quicker. And then we also have less staff turnover. If you're motivated within the business, it's highly unlikely that you will leave. So there's going to be less staff turnover, and that ultimately has the effect of decreasing costs because the business has to spend, less money in recruiting more people. The interview process is also quite long, so they potentially lose productivity in that sense. However, that's going to decrease costs, and then that will ultimately increase profit because we know profit is given by the equation of revenue minus expenses. So if your expenses are less, that is one way that you can increase your profit. Where we have well-trained and effective employees, that means that outputs are of higher quality. That means that greater customer satisfaction and business reputation is going to occur, and then there's going to be greater sales revenue, and increased market share. So this is really important. I feel like when employees know what they're doing, therefore they're able to actually help customers a lot more. So for example, if you think about a bank, if employees are adequately trained on how to resolve customer concerns, that means that when customers come into the bank, they are able to get their issues and problems fixed fairly quickly because employees know what they're doing. They're not wasting time, asking other people or trying to figure it out. So if they're well trained, they're going to be very effective in addressing that. So outputs are of high quality. Therefore, customers are going to be more satisfied because they've had their issues resolved quickly, and that means they're going to continue being a customer because they're satisfied. That's going to help increase their sales revenue. They might recommend, that bank to their friends. So now that, you've brought on new customers, and that's going to help improve market share and also help ultimately improve profit as well. Okay, now let's move on to the motivation theory. So we need to know three. These are the three that we need to know. So the first one is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is just saying that human needs are arranged on a hierarchy, and they're arranged in, they need to be completed in sequential order. So it is the unsatisfied need above a person in a hierarchy that is a source of motivation. So it's sort of like a ladder that they have to climb, and once they've achieved a need, it no longer, it like ceases to be a source of motivation, and so they're going to look at the next need above it to, which motivates them. Then we have Locke and Latham's goal setting theory. This is just suggesting that motivation is derived from setting and attaining goals, and so goals need to be challenging, set jointly, specific, monitored, and given feedback. And then Lawrence and Nahoria's for drive theory. This is where motivation is derived from four basic needs: the act to drive people. So the drives that we need to know are the drives to acquire, bond, learn, and defend. And those are sort of the basic needs that people are driven by. So looking at the hierarchy of needs first. So this is the hierarchy, and this is what I meant when it was placed in this little pyramid. So at the base of that pyramid, we have the physiological needs. Do not call this psychological needs because many people call this psychological needs and they will get 0 marks for that. So it is physiological needs. Essentially, this is just looking at like the physical needs of the employee. So some examples of that might be being paid appropriately. So having appropriate wages, having appropriate working conditions, maybe just having access to, a kitchen, having access to water, just the basic physical needs of the employee in a work environment. Then we have the safety needs. So that's the next one up. So safety needs could include job security. It could be having access to a safe workplace. So nothing that has, impending danger, nothing that's unsafe, nothing, maybe, you want an intact, safe workplace physically. Then we have social needs. So having a positive corporate culture, maybe, having rituals, opportunities to socialize with other people in the business, having the business setting collaborative tasks for employees, so giving them the opportunity to get to know and work with other people, and even just having work events as well. Then we have esteem needs. So this is looking at promotions, responsibilities, and anything that helps the sort of looking at how the employee feels about themselves. So, boosting their confidence, boosting their esteem. And then self-actualization. So opportunities for growth and creativity, and also providing a bit of that challenging element of challenging work. So with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the principles of this, so we need to understand that needs are deficiencies, so that a person feels compelled to satisfy. So that's linking to the idea of, they're going to continue striving up that little pyramid. And once they've achieved one need, then they're going to continue and look at the next need that they need to satisfy because it's a deficiency. Needs need to be satisfied in sequential order. So if they've satisfied their physiological needs, they cannot aspire to satisfy their social needs without satisfying the safety needs. So it has to be completed in sequential order. And then when needs are satisfied, they no longer become motivators of behaviors that the person seeks to satisfy. So they'll then look at the next need too, that will need to be satisfied. Okay, and then we have the 4-drive theory. So this proposes that individuals are motivated to achieve 4 basic needs, and those are known as drives. So don't call the drives needs. They are specifically called drives. And so the drives need to be met simultaneously. But these are the 4 drives. So we have the drive to acquire, bond, learn, and defend. So for HR, how might they develop these drives? So the drive to acquire, they might, reward individual employees with praise, recognition, and interesting assignments. Even just having a reward system linked to performance. So it's really just about achieving and this idea of obtaining some sort of reward in some form, whether that be appraisal or, in financial reward. Then we have the drive to bond. So maybe some strategies could include encouraging teamwork, collaborative tasks, events and rituals. Business could even think about the corporate culture, so a culture of team spirit, having the sense of openness and pride. And then the drive to learn. So this is ensuring that tasks are interesting and challenging and they actually stimulate employees, so they offer that element of challenge. And then even just providing training opportunities, because training can allow employees to, upskill themselves, gain better knowledge around what they're doing. And so in providing the training opportunities, that's going to help them learn a lot more. And then the drive to defend. It's important to understand with the drive to defend, this is a latent drive, which just means that it will only be activated when there is a threat in the workplace. Otherwise, it's latent. It doesn't exist. It will only be activated when it's needed. So to prevent the drive to defend from being activated, or in supporting that, the manager could implement a participative management style, so having open communication and decentralized decision making, where they consider employees, make them feel belonged, and a part of business in making decisions. Implementing policies for dispute resolution and having a supportive workplace. So the second one is quite important. So implementing policies for dispute resolution, because that just ensures that employees feel safe and they feel like they have that structure, or they have that aspect which they can follow, where if they do feel like they are in threat, or if they feel like they're in danger, they can follow that. For example, having a grievance procedure. Okay, awesome. Then we have Lock and Latham. So Lock and Latham, it's important with the goal setting theory that it satisfies these 5 components. So goals should have clarity, which just means that they should be clear and specific, so that it's clear to the employees what they're striving for, what they are actually targeting. If it's vague, it's difficult to measure. So it's important that it's clear and specific. It also offers it should also offer a bit of challenge. So goals must be an appropriate level of difficulty to ensure employees have something to work towards. So it shouldn't be extremely difficult, but it should have that element of challenge so that it's still challenging the employees and motivating them to work something towards being better. Then we have commitment. This is the employee's attachment or determination to achieve a goal. So I feel like that's fairly explanatory, just how determined are they to achieve that goal. And then feedback, it's important that the business is providing the employee with comments on their progress and how they're going with achieving the goal. And then task complexity. So tasks that is to be completed shouldn't overwhelm employees, but also match their skills and ability. So it's sort of now looking at the employee and their skills and their abilities, and sort of ensuring that whatever goals they have shouldn't overwhelm the employee. Shouldn't overwhelm the employee, and sort of match their skills and ability as well. Okay, then we have performance management. So in performance management, we needed to know about these 4 ways that a manager could potentially, understand employee performance. So the first one is management by objectives. This just means that it's a participatory setting where a manager and employee, they jointly determine a set of employee objectives and goals. And so at the end of the review period, performance is measured against these established goals. The goals should follow the same principles by Locke and Latham's theory. So it should be clear, should be challenging, all of that. But essentially how this works is that employees and the manager will jointly set goals for the employee to work towards. And then there'll be a review period where the manager gives that employee a bit of feedback on their goals and sort of how they're tracking. Then we have performance appraisals. So this is used to measure the individual's performance over a set period of time. So the manager, who is the appraiser, and the employee, who is the appraisee, come together to discuss the employee's performance over that period of time. So the manager will give them that feedback, but essentially it follows these 3 steps. So it's important for the manager to determine what performance they need to measure. Then they will evaluate the performance, and then they will review the performance and provide feedback to the employee so that the strengths can be recognized and problems can be rectified. So they will sort of observe and assess the employee on that criteria, and also provide that feedback to employee. Then there's also self-evaluation. So this is where the employee assesses or rates their own performance in a number of areas. And so those ratings can be then compared to the assessment completed by a manager, and the differences can be discussed. And then lastly, we had employee observation. So this was where employee observation involves the collection of feedback relating to an employee's performance from other employees, other managers, or customers. And so there's many ways that a business could implement employee observation. So they could do 360-degree multi-source feedback from other employees. So just getting feedback from other stakeholders. It doesn't just have to be the manager. And then even secret shoppers. So having a stakeholder come into the environment that the employee is working in without the employee knowing that they are being assessed. And then that secret shopper is going to, assess the employee on their performance and then pass on the assessment to the manager. This would only work, I would feel, in a retail environment in a retail environment. So for example, if, it was a bakery and then we had another employee come into the store, purchase something, and sort of assess that other employee in terms of how they're working, that would be an example of a secret shopper. And then even just recordings of phone conversations as well. Okay. Then we had termination management. So we had 4 different ones. So there was resignation, retirement, redundancy, and dismissal. And it's important to consider which one of these is involuntary and voluntary. So in your mind, just have a read through this and then think about what ones would be involuntary and which ones would be voluntary. Okay, let's have a look through them. So, resignation, this is when an employee leaves the workplace, usually to go to another job. So, this one is voluntary because often employees resign or they use resignation if they get a better job offer or if they are unsatisfied with their current workplace. So, that is a voluntary form of termination. Retirement, this occurs when an employee decides to leave the paid workforce entirely. So, this is also voluntary because no one is forcing anyone to retire. The employee is themselves making that decision and then sort of choosing to leave the paid workforce when they see fit. Redundancy, this is where it's a termination of employment by an employer because the employer no longer needs a particular job to be done, so the job no longer exists. So this one is involuntary because the employee has no control over the existence of their job. That's the employer. So the employer no longer needs that particular job to be done, and therefore that job, no longer exists in the business, and therefore people who were completing that job would be made redundant. Dismissal. So this is termination due to incompetence and indiscipline. This one is an involuntary form of termination because, it's termination due to, the behavior or, inappropriate behavior of employee, and therefore employer tends to initiate this. So, entitlements. Which forms of termination would involve a redundancy package? So have a think. Feel like should be fairly straightforward, but have a think which one would involve a redundancy package. So this one would be redundancy. It would just be redundancy. None of the other ones would involve a redundancy package because a redundancy package is specifically for redundancy, or like where termination occurs due to redundancy. Okay, which forms of termination would involve a notice of termination? What would you guys say? So with this one, all of them but dismissal require notice of termination. So if you were resigning, you would need to give notice of termination. So you can't just one day decide that you don't want to work for a place anymore and never show up to work. Like, you have to notify them of your resignation, and therefore following that in your contract there might be a period where you're required to work and then you have to leave. So but all of them in some shape or form require notice of that you're ending the contract, or you're terminating or leaving that place. Okay, which forms of termination would involve a payment of accrued long service leave? So all of them. Long service leave is essentially like where if you're someone who's worked at the business for more than 7 years, you're entitled to get paid long service leave. Okay, so now looking at participants in the workplace. So with this, we have many different participants in the workplace. The first one is human resource managers. So their responsibility is being the bridge of communication between employers and employees, and they are responsible for dealing with the disputes. So there's lots of other things that they're also responsible for. For example, being up to date with awards and agreements, and then subsequently notifying seniors of any changes. But they essentially are responsible for dealing with that employee and employer relationship. Employees, their interests will be to prioritize themselves and, in negotiations with management, and also take industrial actions if necessary. So especially when there's the formation of agreements, they would, be involved in negotiations, but their key interest is sort of prioritizing themselves and getting the best for them. Then we have employer associations. They represent employers in the collective bargaining process. They also advise employers on their rights and responsibilities, and they lobby to the government in support of employers. So employer associations are just unions, but for employers. And then unions, they represent employees. So they negotiate wages for their members during collective bargaining process, also organize industrial action, and then also provide support and advice to members about their working rights. And then we have the Fair Work Commission. They are responsible for creating awards, approving agreements, and also being arbitrators or mediators as well, if it comes to that. Cool. Then we have awards and agreements. So it's important that you understand the distinction between both of them. An award is a legally binding minimum requirement for wages and conditions of a specific industry. So every industry has its own award, but they essentially just set out the bare minimum. So the legal binding minimum requirement for wages and conditions. And so when we're looking at legally binding, so they're determined and reviewed by the Fair Work Commission every 4 years. And if a business doesn't abide by the award, at least, that is illegal. It's unlawful. And then the minimum requirement, they need to surpass the standards of wages and conditions set out by the National Employment Standards. It's also targeted towards specific industry, like I said before. So all industries have their own awards. So there's like the retail award, there is the aviation award. There is the, I think, nurse award. I'm just thinking of random industries right now, but every industry has its own award. Okay, then we have an enterprise agreement. So this is the written collective agreement made between employer and employees at a workplace, and they set out the terms and conditions of employment. So enterprise agreements go above awards, but it's just it's sort of the collective agreement made between employers and employees. And so it applies to a single workplace only, and they're negotiated during the enterprise bargaining period. And they also have to be approved by the Fair Work Commission. And so in approving a specific agreement, the Fair Work Commission would need to ensure that it passes the Better Off overall test. It has a grievance procedure. It meets the National Employment Standards, since that's the minimum requirement. And then it also has an expiry date so that it's constantly evolving and being improved upon. All right, then we also need to know dispute resolution. So in dispute resolution, we have mediation and arbitration. Mediation is the formal methods of dispute resolution where an independent third party facilitates the discussion occurring between the disputing parties so that they come to their own resolution. So essentially, if there's been a disagreement between employee and an employer in trying to come up with a solution or a resolution to that issue or that dispute, the workplace can use mediation where an independent third party will come and they will try to facilitate discussion between the disputing parties. So it's encouraging the two disputing parties to talk to each other in a formal environment where there's a third party, sort of talking with each other so that they're able to come up with a resolution. That third party they're not going to hold any bias. They're not going to say, the employer is right, you should do this, but rather there's someone that is trying to facilitate discussion, trying to get the two people to talk to each other so that they can come to their own resolution. However, if this does not work, then another method of dispute resolution can be used, and that dispute resolution is arbitration. So this is where both parties put their case forward to an independent third party who then makes the final legally binding decision. Arbitration occurs in a more of a formal environment, and it's often at court because both parties will put their case forward to the Fair Work Commission or the court, and they will then make that final decision. That third party will make the final decision, and that decision is legally binding. So both parties have to follow that through, and if they don't, that would be unlawful. Okay, now we have Unit 3, Area Study 1. Sorry, that should say, Unit 3, Area Study 3. That is correct. And that is Operations Management. I'm going to squiz through this because I am aware of the time that we have, but have a quick look through the key knowledge points, and then we will continue on. Okay, let's have a look. So, key elements of the operation system. So we have inputs, processes, and outputs. Inputs are everything that the business uses to create its final outputs. Processes is where the business uses its inputs to create its outputs, and then outputs are the final good or service that the business produces. So let's consider the inputs of a cafe. So I want you all to think about what would be the inputs, processes, and outputs of a cafe. Give you 2 minutes, maybe a minute, to think about that. All right, let's have a look at this. So the inputs of a cafe would be the workers, it could be the coffee machines, it's the milk, it's the Java chips, it's the coffee beans, it's the time required to make the coffee. So I think the easiest way to think about this is cafes most their output that they're creating is coffee, right? So we want to be specific in terms of now that like they're making coffee. So what are the ingredients? What are the things that the cafe needs to actually create that coffee? And that would be the labor, it would be the people, it would be the time required to make the coffee, it would be the milk. So thinking about like the physical ingredients, the physical things, but also the intangible items as well, such as time. Okay, and then we have processes. So now the processes would involve potentially, frothing up the milk, grinding up the beans, pouring the milk into the cup, all of that. And then the final output is the coffee. All right, now think of a service business. So I'll give you all maybe a minute to think about the inputs, processes, and outputs of a travel store, like a holiday advising store like Flight Center. What would be the inputs, processes, and outputs? Okay, let's have a look. So with holiday information, we have inputs. So that would be like the physical space required. It would be the workers. It would be, the technology required by the workers to help their customers. And then processes, delivering the holiday information from to the customer. And then the output is the actual holiday information. So this is a little bit of a note from the VCA exam report, but they said it seemed that some students believe that in a service business, processes and outputs were the same thing, but this is incorrect. So the distinction here in processes is the deliberation or the delivery of the holiday information, and then outputs would be the actual holiday information. Okay, we also need to understand the difference between manufacturing and a service business. So the first thing to consider is the tangibility. So a manufacturer produces goods that are tangible versus a service, which is intangible. Then also thinking about, with tangibility, if something is tangible, it can be touched, stored, and held, meaning that also it's going to be homogeneous. So every output that a manufacturer creates, it's the same, it's identical. Whereas in a service business, it's intangible, so it's difficult to store, but it's also customized. So output is customized. So if you think about a banking business, every customer that comes to the bank has a different concern, and therefore the service that the bank provides will be customized and would be tailored depending on the needs of the customer. So one customer might come into the bank, asking for a bank loan, while another customer might, simply be wanting to set up a bank account. So all of those concerns are customized. Whereas if you think of a manufacturing business like Yakult, they create identical models. So all of that is identical, all of that is homogeneous. Okay, and then involves minimal final customer contact, whereas service involves a high degree of customer contact. It's generally production and capital intensive, so there's a lot of capital involved and machinery involved with manufacturing. And then with service, it's a lot more labor intensive. It relies on the expertise of employees and them delivering that service. The last thing to consider is that production and consumption are separate with the manufacturer. So the output, the goods, are going to be produced, and then they will be transported to a area or a place where customers can then purchase those goods. So production and consumption occur at separate times, whereas with a service organization, they occur simultaneously. So with the bank example, as a customer is asking to set up a bank account, the employer or the employee will be helping the customer set up the bank account, and that output that is being created is the setting up of the bank account. So the production and consumption is occurring at the same time. Or even with the example of the holiday information, so the advice is being communicated to the customer, but at the same time they're receiving that advice. So they're getting that holiday information in that way. All right. We also need to be aware of the 4 areas that the business can improve effectiveness and efficiency in operations. So we had these 4 areas. The first one is technological development. So we had CAD. So CAD is the computer software that streamlines and aids in the creation of product designs and testing of modified product designs. So some advantages of this: you have design accuracy, you have less time required for design, and also just being able to identify errors before they occur in production. The disadvantages of CAD is that it has high setup costs. Since it is a technological development, it's the software, it tends to be expensive. And also there might be some training involved. So employees might need to be trained, that costs money, and that also costs time. CAM is very much similar. CAM is just involving the process, it involves the automated control of the production process, including machinery, tools, and equipment by a computer. Advantages: flexible and responsive to customized demands. So as new orders come in, a computer can adapt to them. Also improved speed of production, improved productivity, and reduces labor requirements and associated costs. Disadvantages is can be quite expensive, and also an error in CAM's functioning could result in the entire production process being halted, therefore being counterproductive to the business. Then we have an automated production line. This is where raw materials enter a series of workstations where finished products leave. Advantages is greater precision, less errors, not as many labor, or not as many people will be needed to work, so less labor costs. There's going to be more safety because you can get dangerous tasks to be allocated to robots, and then reduction in waste. Disadvantages: high setup costs, so it's quite expensive, and then one error in the sequence can have an impact on the whole production process, so it is terrible for productivity as well in that sense, in the case that the error occurs. Then we have online services, so sort of refers to the development and maintenance of an accessible online business website. Advantages is that there's no physical store needed, so the business is saving on rental payments and labor costs as well. It's also 24/7 access, so anyone from the business, any customer anywhere from the world can purchase and can access the online store. So larger time frame to sell products, therefore more sales potentially, compared to your brick and mortar store where it's open maybe 9 to 5. So there's only that time frame for people to purchase items and goods. And then sales can also be processed without the need for human labor. The disadvantages, so expensive to set up and maintain in the long term, and also potential security risks, such as hacking, since it is an online platform. And then we have robotics, so it's a form of technology which deals with design, construction, operation, and application of robots to create intelligent machines that can assist humans. Advantages is that there's going to be greater speed, greater safety, reduction in labor costs, more efficient, greater precision, reduces waste. So many advantages. Then disadvantages is that it's going to be expensive again. Errors, if they're occurring, will impact production, security threats, CSR issues with removal of human employees. So all of the advantages and disadvantages are very, very similar for all of the technological developments. You just have to consider and just shape them a little bit so that they're specific to the one you're talking about. Okay, materials. So we had these materials management strategies. First one is forecasting. That just looks at predicting and quickly ordering materials that are required for the business's operation. So it looks at analyzing past and present trends to predict future business needs, essentially. So the first one is predicting future demand by looking at past trends and then therefore ordering enough materials to meet that demand. So a really good example that I like using is that with Yakult, a lot of people like to drink Yakult during the winter because the winter is when a lot of people tend to get sick. So they drink Yakult in hopes of improving their immune system and immunity and preventing them from getting sick. So during the months of winter, which I believe is June and July, they have high demand for Yakult. So there's higher demand, there's higher consumption, and therefore they order greater materials so that they can meet that demand and produce more so that they can ensure that they are selling the most during June and July and can continue making a profit in those months. Then we have the MPS, so the master production schedule, that just sets out the requirements, specifically looking at what needs to be produced, how much of an item, when items are needed to be produced by, and how the items will be produced as well. Materials requirement planning is more so looking at supporting the production schedule by setting out exact material requirements, as well as supplier lead-in times. Just-in-time is an inventory management system, and that just looks at, ordering materials just as they're required by the business for production. So ordering inputs more frequently to reduce inventory costs. Okay, and then we have quality control. So quality control, this is the checking of products and services over the production stages to ensure that they meet those predetermined standards of quality. So it involves establishing standards of quality, inspecting the output, comparing the inspection results to the established quality standards, and then taking corrective action. Then quality assurance is the certification that a business gets if they meet the requirements of an independent third party. So essentially, the independent third party will come and inspect the quality processes of the business, and if they feel like they've achieved their requirements, then they get that certification. So it's a proactive process, unlike quality control, which is reactive. So remember, there's proactive and reactive approaches to change. TQM is a holistic quality management approach that aims to achieve continuous improvement of production and sort of creative participation of all people. It has 3 principles: continuous improvement, customer focus, and worker participation. Okay, then we have waste. So waste is the unused or underutilized inputs that cannot be sold. And so it is quite important in a business because if a business produces waste, it is inefficient. So that's really important for them to consider because all the inputs that are now waste, they could have used to create their outputs. So they're incurring more costs. If a business is making so many production errors that waste levels are high, it is also ineffective. So it's also impacting their ability to meet their objectives and make a profit. Okay, so in targeting waste, we have this strategy called reduce, reuse, recycle, and it is just looking at, use materials within the production, again, rather than completely discarding them. So reduce, minimizing the amount of waste occurring in the production. Reuse is using items more than once. So for example, Yakult chemically treats their water to reuse in production rather than actually discarding it completely. And then recycle is having a new use for the item instead of throwing it away. So just looking at ways where things can be used again. We also had lean management. So this is also a approach that can be used to maximize customer value, but also reduce waste. To improve efficiency, we had pull, tact, zero defects, and one piece flow. Pull is just only producing when a product has been ordered. Tact is looking at the rate of production required to meet customer demand. So looking at time and using time efficiently to produce. Zero defects is the commitment to no errors in production, so having perfection in production system. One piece flow is reducing idle time in between production stages. Okay, then we had global considerations in operation management. So we had global sourcing of inputs. That just looks at whether business imports resources for production overseas. And that just takes advantage of comparative advantages. It's a lot more cheaper, helps them achieve economies of scale, but disadvantages is that they have a loss of control because they don't know how other organizations overseas are operating, if they're operating ethically, and there's also a loss of Australian jobs as well. Overseas manufacturing, this is when the entire production process occurs outside of Australia, takes advantage of comparative advantages, very similar to global sourcing of inputs. And then global outsourcing is when the business uses organizations outside of Australia to undertake non-production related business functions. So for example, a lot of businesses like to outsource telecommunications, marketing, website development, anything that's non-core to the business. All right, we have squizzed through Unit 3 very quickly. Now let us move on to Unit 4. So Unit 4 is looking at the need for change. I'll give everyone maybe a minute just to have a quick look through the key knowledge, just to remind yourself of what we covered in Area Study 1. All right, let's look. So change is confronting and makes people nervous. You would have noticed the change in the slide as well, and it probably made you a little bit uncomfortable because trying to just prove the point that it is uncomfortable, but it is inevitable and it is ongoing and you cannot escape it, and a business cannot escape it like people cannot escape it. So with change, it comes in two forms. We have reactive and proactive change. So reactive change is just acting in response to a situation rather than creating or controlling it. So it's just looking at this idea of unplanned change that pressures might force the business to undertake. While proactive change is where the business will rather create and control a situation rather than responding to something after it's happened. So this is now looking at planned change that they are undertaking before pressures actually force you to undertake change. So when we're thinking about the most effective form of change, it would be proactive, just because proactive is you're controlling the situation rather than responding to it. And when responding to it, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll respond to it in the most effective way. So it's a lot more, when you're taking proactive change, it's a lot more likely that it's going to be successful because You've planned it, you've assessed your ability to execute the change, you've organized the resources required to execute the change, so it's a lot more effective. Okay, then we have our KPIs. So when we're thinking about our key performance indicators, we have all of these ones that we need to know. So percentage of market share, that is looking at the proportion of sales that a business holds in an industry. Net profit figures are, revenue minus expenses, just that difference. Productivity growth, very similar to efficiency. It's just the way your outputs sort of increase and decrease relative to the inputs that you use. And then number of sales, the total number of product that has been sold over a period of time. Rates of staff absenteeism, that's just looking at how many work days that have been lost due to unscheduled staff absence from work. So if staff are not attending scheduled work, that is recorded as staff absenteeism. So looking at that rate. Staff turnover is the measure of employees leaving the organization over a period of time, but also required replacement. Very important that you include that part of the definition, required replacement, because it's not only employees leaving the business, but the rate at which they are requiring replacement. So, that they're recruiting staff as well, because otherwise the business cannot function without people. Okay, then we have a level of wastage, so the amount of underutilized or unused inputs, resources such as materials, storage, labor, and time within the production process. And then number of customer complaints, that is just looking at the number of customers that have approached the business to express dissatisfaction of their goods and services. Number of workplace accidents, so it's the amount of unplanned accidents or incidents that interrupt events or incidents that interrupt workflow. And that could be injury or property damage. And then number of website hits, that's the number of times that customers have visited or engaged with a business's website. Little activity for you guys. So I have 3. I know I've just whizzed through those definitions, but I have 3 definitions here. You need to spot the mistake. One of these definitions has the mistake. Is it A, B, or C? So have a quick read and then mentally note which one has the mistake. Okay, let's have a look. So A, B, or C, which one is incorrect? So it would be A. Level of wastage refers to the materials that are underutilized or unused through the production process. So the keyword here is they've used materials, but it's important to note that waste is any input. So it could be money, it could be labor, it could be time. So level of wastage, the way you fix this, is it just refers to the amount of inputs. So just being a bit more general in that sense. Things to remember. So staff turnover, making sure that you include required replacement. Level of wastage, it's a waste. The business waste is the business's unused or underutilized input. So the point I just made before, it's not just material waste. Number of customer complaints, important that you highlight how it's the number of times the customer notifies the business of their dissatisfaction. And then number of workplace accidents, it's not just injuries, it's anything that just interrupts workflow. Okay, Lewin's force field analysis. So we have driving forces and we have restraining forces. Driving forces are the factors that are affecting a situation that are supporting the change, and then restraining forces are the factors that are hindering or blocking the change from occurring. So in this theory, we need to understand that situations are maintained by an equilibrium, and it's driving forces that are pushing change to occur, and it's restraining forces that are hindering change from occurring. And a situation is the way it is because of those interactions between these counteracting forces. So Lewin is all about driving versus restraining forces, and change occurs depending on which force overpowers the other force. So if your driving forces are stronger than your restraining forces, then change is likely to occur. If restraining forces are stronger than your driving forces, then change is unlikely to occur. And a business would need to develop strategies to minimize the strength of restraining forces so that driving forces are stronger, so that change will occur. We need to know all about these driving and restraining forces. So we have these ones, and then we have these ones as well as restraining forces. So be familiar with all of them, but it sort of depends on the change that is occurring, and different driving forces will, be present depending on the specific change. Okay. Then we have Porter's generic strategy. So the first one under Porter's generic strategies, we have the lower cost approach. So the lower cost approach is where a business aims to gain a competitive advantage by becoming the lowest cost producer in industry. The competitive advantage that is being gained is that they can sell at a lower than average price and maintain profit levels, or they can even sell at a normal price but increase its profits margin. And these are some strategies that a business can implement to use the lower cost approach. So they might use technology, they might outsource, essentially just thinking about ways that they can minimize their expenses so that they can produce at a lower cost and then potentially pass down those savings to the consumer. Advantages and disadvantages. Key advantages is that they're appealing to price-conscious consumers. Just because since they're able to produce at a low cost, they can also pass down those savings and sell at a lower cost as well. So really appealing to price-conscious consumers. However, the disadvantages is that price-conscious consumers aren't loyal to the business because they're just going to be going to wherever they can get a bargain for. So they might go to another business if that sells at a cheaper price as well. Then customers might also associate lower prices with lower quality products. So it's not really appealing to the whole market. And then standardized products are easier and cheaper to produce, but they might not meet the demands of customers who want more tailored and creative products. Then we have differentiation. This is the approach that involves a business developing the uniqueness of the good or service using innovation. So now just looking to stand out more so in the market. And so the competitive advantage is that since they're making and since they're selling a unique product that customers can't purchase anywhere, they are able to charge a premium price on that product. So they're earning profit in that way. And these are some ways that they might differentiate itself. They might use innovation. They might, look at existing products that are there in the market and look to build new attractive and new product features. So developing existing products. And then the advantages of this is that since they're able to charge a premium, they get more profit. They are appealing to brand loyal customers just because now customers are going to be loyal to them since they can't purchase their good or service anywhere else. And it's also accessible to any business, regardless of the size. Disadvantages is that not appealing to price-conscious consumers since they're more so looking for the best bargain that's out there in the market. The initial cost might not outweigh the benefits as well, and it's quite risky and high investment. And that might not always pay off because, say, for example, you're an ice cream store and you've spent so much in trying to come up with a really unique ice cream flavor, but then once you release it, it's not liked by your consumers, then you've lost all of that investment into that development. So it is a little bit risky. Okay, I'm going to give everyone maybe a minute to have a quick read through this Mark the Answer activity. Actually, I might skip past this just because I am wary of time and we still have another area of study to get through. So I am going to just squiz through this. Essentially, you can have a look. The slides are available to you, so you can have a look through the explanation as well. So let's whiz through that. Okay, Unit 4, Area Study 2. Is now looking at implementing change. So leadership during change. A leader is really important in many different ways. The first one is in building that momentum towards successful change. So really looking at developing shared vision of change and sort of communicating that vision to stakeholders to, again, build that support for change. Leaders are also really important in reducing resistance to change. So change, as we know, and as we identified in Area Study 1 in Unit 4, is a difficult and confronting time. And so managers are required high level of interpersonal skills to empathize with, understand, and address the concerns of stakeholders firsthand. And leader is also important in directing the business and its stakeholders towards the same goals. So a leader should ensure that all stakeholders are focused on successfully implementing the change and also helping increase commitment to the change in that way as well. So when we're looking at strategies, so we learned about KPIs before, but now we also need to look at strategies, management strategies to respond to KPIs and to seek business opportunities as well. So we have all of that here. So have a think about what might be, depending on the KPI that you're trying to improve upon, what might be some good management strategies that you might match up with those KPIs. Have a bit of a think. Okay, so some ways that you might match up the different ones. So increase investment in technology, that might help improve your market share because if you have greater investment in technology, so for example, if you implement automated production lines, there's less defects occurring in the production process. And so customers are going to receive products that they're a lot more satisfied with. Therefore, they're going to be coming back to the business since they are receiving products that are meeting the quality expectations, and therefore, be buying from the business, increasing their sales, therefore market share. I'm going to whiz through these ones. So Blumen's three-step change model. So this is a theory that outlines the steps a business should take when implementing change to its business practices so that the change is a lot more long-lasting. So unfreeze occurs before the change, movement occurs during the change, and refreeze occurs after the change. So with unfreeze, this is the preparation that a business takes before the change to open it up for change. So to really establish that need for change. That's a really important part of unfreeze, is establishing the need for change. Movement is the actual implementation of the change and the transition from the business's old practices to its new ones. So now we're actually implementing the change, and therefore it's going to be the period of significant resistance because change is actually being implemented into the business. Refreeze is all about consolidating the change into the business's culture so that the business can see the change into the long term, because there's no point of spending so much time unfreezing and implementing the change just for the business to abandon it. So it's really important that the business refreezes the change so that it's long term and it's embedded into the business. So ways they might do that is by celebrating and recognizing positive employee behavior. All right, then we have CSR. So corporate social responsibility is the commitment by an organization to conduct its business in an ethical manner that goes above and beyond its legal requirements and aims to minimize negative impact on stakeholders, on the environment, society, and economy, as well as other stakeholders. So keyword there is going above and beyond its legal requirements, exceeding its legal requirements. And so with CSR, when you're implementing change, when we're using CSR to implement change, it comes in two forms. The change itself could be socially responsible, or the business could consider the treatment of its stakeholders when implementing the change. So when we're looking at the first one, with the change itself being socially responsible, a business could ensure that the change involves maybe limiting negative environmental impacts, so using green energy, biodegradable packaging, or even just supporting local jobs and Australian jobs, so not outsourcing or sourcing inputs from Australian businesses. Then the second one, so just ensuring that stakeholders are treated ethically throughout the change process. So just being transparent, providing clear communication, allowing time for transition services, allowing work-life balance, all of that. All right, then we have Sengei's learning organization. So this is where the business proposes that businesses are flexible, adaptive, and productive during periods of change, and those businesses will be successful in implementing its desired changes. And so this is a quote from Peter Senge, but in the long run, the only sustainable advantage in your organization is the ability to learn faster than your competition. So all about just utilizing the talents of employees and this idea of encouraging continuous learning. So in Senge's learning organization, it has 5 disciplines. So we have all of these 5. So the first one is systems thinking. So it's the idea of viewing this business as a really interrelated and complex system, but it's a holistic view of the business. So seeing how it's connected with each other rather than breaking it down into separate areas. So it's a concept that links to all the 4 other disciplines. So it's the overarching discipline, and really just thinking about how it's the business understanding, it's the holistic image of themselves. And only then they can attempt to develop the other 4 disciplines, because it's seeing how everything is interrelated rather than everything in isolation. Okay, then we have mental models. So these are the deeply ingrained assumptions, generalizations, and images that influence one's understanding of the world and therefore how one reacts to the world. So it's important to challenge mental models so that the business can continue challenging old assumptions and gaining empowerment to generate new and innovative ideas. And that can be done by having a culture of open communication, inquiry, and trust. Then we have personal mastery. So this is the discipline where individuals are committed to self-improvement and looking to deepen their personal vision. So therefore constantly being in self-reflection. And so that can be done through training and development and self-evaluation. Personal mastery is a stepping stone towards team learning. And this is another quote. So organizations learn only through individuals who learn. So individual learning does not guarantee organizational learning, but without it, no organizational learning occurs. And then building a shared vision. So this is this idea that a business that has a built shared vision of its future is one that aligns all people within the business towards the same goal. So really everyone motivated to achieve the same thing. That's just helping to, generate that clear focus and enthusiasm for learning. It's also another stepping stone for team learning. A shared vision cannot be dictated, so it can't just be set by one person. It can't be set by the manager. It's a conversation between everyone in the business and everyone agreeing to strive towards the same path. Team learning. This is the process by which a team's capacity to create desired results is built and developed. So it's a process of aligning and developing the capacities of a team to create the results its members truly desire. So it's all about creating an environment where knowledge and experience is shared by everyone in the team, and therefore problem solving and learning is a lot more effective. So in this sense, collaboration is very important in this learning organization, because people don't just learn in isolation, they learn together. So that's what this specific discipline is arguing. These are some examples when you are applying Senge. So with mental models, so maybe a business could introduce this by encouraging employees to challenge mental models through continuous improvement, this idea of continuous improvement. Personal mastery, so performance appraisal, self-evaluation, training, so really providing opportunities for the employee to really think critically about their abilities and themselves. Building a shared vision, so feedback from employees about what their goals and vision should be, clear communication from leaders, and about the goals of the business. Team learning, so setting that collaborative task, group projects, regular team meetings. And then systems thinking is meetings between the business's department. So trying to, again, highlight the interrelatedness between the business and its different areas. Employees taking up positions from different departments to broaden their views. All right, then we have our exam knowledge. So important exam knowledge, exam skills. So one key part of the exam is that you have your 10-mark questions. So when you're approaching your 10-mark questions, the first thing I like to do, I follow a couple of steps. So the first thing I do is I break the question down, especially if there are multiple parts. And normally with a 10-mark question, it will have multiple parts. So for example, you might get a question like this. So describe how Lewin's three-step change model could be used to implement change, and explain why leadership during change management is important in ensuring change is long-lasting. So the way I would break down this question is I like using square brackets. So you can see how I have used it for this part. So the first part of the question wants you to describe how Lewin's three-step change model could be used to implement change. And the second part of the question is asking you to explain why leadership during change management is important to ensure change is long-lasting. So then once you've done this, the second step is to then highlight the task words so that you know what to include in your answer. So task words here would be describe and explain, so I would be highlighting that. And then once you've highlighted the task words, it's important to make a plan. I would also say when you're highlighting task words, you could even underline the key content questions. So I would also underline Lewin's three-step change model and leadership during change management, and even your limiting words. So maybe circling limiting words. So for an example, maybe this question was saying, describe how the first two steps of the three-step change model could be used to implement change. So in that case, you want to circle the first two steps, because if you talked about the third step, you wouldn't be getting any marks. That's not what the question is asking you to do. So it's asking you about how the first two steps, it wants you to talk about the first two steps. So sort of just like highlighting your limiting words, so you are aware when you're reading back through the question. Then you want to make a plan. So how will you actually approach your response? What will you include in your body paragraph 1, 2, and 3? So remember, it's sort of written like an essay. So you have an introduction, but then also you want to plan out how you would structure your response as well. And then ensure you write in paragraphs as well. So you don't want to just write one big blob of one super big paragraph. You should write it in separate paragraphs. So it's clear, how you're targeting different parts of the question depending on the paragraph that you're talking about. And then, your response should have an introduction. It should have 3 body paragraphs, roughly, not exactly 3, but roughly around 3 is just a good number to go with. And then a conclusion. And then while you're writing a response, I would be rereading the question as well, so that you're linking your response when you're explaining it, when you're analyzing your writing, or when you're analyzing it, that you're linking it to the essay question, and that you're answering the question, and that you're ensuring that you're not going off on a tangent, but you're staying relevant to the question, because that's what you're getting marks for, is answering the question. So reread your response and ensure that you've answered the question, but also just rereading it so it makes sense, because in your head it might make sense, but just make sure that you reread it and sort of question yourself, would this make sense if another person is reading it? Okay. So another question that a lot of people tend to ask is how many practice exams should you do? So the answer to that is as many as you can, as many that you can fit in. But the recommendation is at least 10 exams with at least 5 or so under time conditions. So the ones that you do under time conditions are really important, because that is ultimately how you will be taking the exam. So doing them under time conditions really helps you develop your ability to think under pressure, to write under pressure, and also just complete the exam under pressure. And then practice exams are also your best form of study, just because It's only when you answer questions that you are applying the content that you've learned. So, spending time on memorizing content isn't the best form of study, just because in practice exams, you're going to be given case studies. You're going to be given, questions that, you have to use the knowledge that you've learned, but also use that as a base, but build upon that so that, you're being specific to whatever the question is asking you. There's no set number, but you should aim to do practice exams until you're confident in your knowledge and only have a few specific areas to improve in. So it's important that with your revision, you're being strategic. There's no point of revising things that you're confident in. You should be targeting your weak areas. So what I would be doing is when you complete practice exam questions, what I like to do is when I answer questions, if I find that I've come across a question that I'm really struggling with, I would highlight it so that I know that, after I complete this exam, I can review the content for this area. I can review the content for this question. Because in the moment of completing that practice exam, I was not 100% confident in answering it. So make sure that you have a strategy that you use. And then also, it's important to also self-mark and self-evaluate. So I like to read your response, read the sample response, annotate your response, see things that you could add, things that you could do to improve, and then potentially try to rewrite your response and then send it to your teacher to give you some feedback so that you're actively implementing the feedback given by you from your teacher or the sample answer, and then you're looking to improve it and you're implementing that. Okay, practice exams. The ultimate form of exam preparation is practice questions / practice exams, and those two being, doing them under time pressure. But when you do a practice exam, complete the exam without notes. That's preferable. But I would say that, the first couple of exams that you do, it's fine if you have your notes next to you, because that's just you trying to become a bit more familiar with, the area of study, especially the first 2 or 3 exams that you do. It will take you some time to get back into the rhythm of, answering questions on area of study 1 or unit 3. So that's fine, but it is important that you do other practice exams under time pressure. The second thing is marking your answer. So there's no point of completing like 10 practice exams in a row and not marking your answers. So I would suggest do a practice exam, mark your answer, understand where you went wrong, so that the next time you do a practice exam, the next time you come across a similar question, you know what to do, you know what to implement. The third thing you should be doing is determining the questions and areas that you struggle the most in. So it kind of links to the idea of, when you're doing the practice exam, highlighting and making note of the things that you struggled with so that you can then, take that into mind and really revise that area. And then revise your notes of those areas and then reattempt the question so that you're 100% confident with that. Okay, so now looking at more of like the timeline. So the month before your exam, that's when you can revise all your notes from the area study, focusing on your weak areas. So maybe if you felt really fuzzy on area study 3, making sure that you revise that because you felt like you're weak, or maybe it might have been the SAC that you got the lowest in. So making sure that you revise that. And then doing some practice exams. So it does not have to be under timed conditions unless you feel super, super confident. And then the weeks before. So that's when you want to be doing practice exams in timed conditions and identifying and developing weaker areas as identified in practice exam performance. So once you complete the practice exams in timed conditions, you might even want to do a bit of analysis. So identify the trends, see which areas that you, like what type of questions that you tend to lose marks on, and then identifying that, and then again, doing more revision so that you're more confident with that, or asking questions to your teacher. Then the night before your exam, it's important that you get a good night's sleep. That's very, very important. So don't just study the whole entire night. It's important for you to relax and for you to remain calm and for you to get rest. Any study that you do the night before the exam, I'm telling you, you will not retain, because your success on the exam will be indicative of consistency and how well you've been able to consistently prepare and study for the exam prior to the actual exam from occurring. So the night before, there's no point of reading the whole BizMan textbook, because that you will retain nothing from that if you pull an all-nighter. It's so important that you have good sleep and good rest so that you wake up fresh in the morning and you're able to complete the exam well. So trust me, that's really, really important, because if you don't get a good night's sleep, you won't be able to, like, on the day of the exam and when you actually read the questions, you won't be able to understand what the question is asking you, or you might like blank out. So it's so important to give your brain a bit of rest. Okay, then the day of the exam, no intense study, just a bit of revision if you'd like to, and also important that you eat well and you drink well. So have a good breakfast, have a light breakfast, and drink plenty of water so that you feel refreshed heading into the exam. Then we have some study tips. So knowledge, understanding, and application. It's important for you have the knowledge, so revise your notes. That's going to give you the knowledge. Understanding you'll develop through practice questions, and physically writing down your practice questions and applying the content. And then application, again, just sort of seeing where you went wrong, identifying the areas where you need more help with, if you've gotten things messed up with content. But yeah, okay. The final and unfortunately most unhelpful tip is that absolutely everyone is different. So really, when you're studying for your exams, different things will work for different people, but these are just some common ones that I feel like a lot of people use. So using flashcards, just to, being familiar with your definitions, and then potentially using one-page summaries. Mind maps are a really good one, especially for like the different areas of studies. You could have like a mind map for everything, just summarizing that area of study. Even just explaining content, I feel like teaching helps a lot with just cementing your knowledge. So communicating it with your family or your friends, having like a study group. Time practice exams also really important. And then also just using examiner's report, that is really, really important. So using the examiner's report, because the examiner's report lists the common mistakes made in the exam. So if you're aware of that, you can be like, okay, don't want to make that mistake, because students tended to make that mistake. So important to read the examiner's report, not only for BizMan, but I feel like for all your subjects like English, but they're quite helpful. And then scheduling, so just time management, making a little like study plan on how you want to fit in all of your subjects to make sure that you're spending, equal amount of time on your subjects, or spending more time on a subject that you feel more uncomfortable or unconfident with. And then even just using your teachers, that's really important too. So even if you just don't know where to start, just reach out to your teacher, and I'm sure they'll be able to give you really good advice and help you sort of begin and start where you want to do and what you want to do. So definitely just use your teachers for like feedback and sort of ask them questions, and sort of even when you write like practice exams or practice questions, if you're unsure on like the marking guide or what you've written, always just reach out to them and they can help you with that as well. All right, amazing. That is it. You've finished all of Year 12 Business Management. Congratulations. But I hope everyone has found this lecture useful. Remember that the lecture slides are available to you, but I really do wish you all the best with your exam preparation, not only for business management, but for all of your other subjects, and all the very best for your final exam. Thanks, guys.